recorded up. So we're good and recording here. So welcome everybody as you're hopping on either the webinar platform or you're hopping on Facebook Live and you get to hang out with us, myself, Dr. Tony Miller, and Samantha Moe, who I'm about to introduce here in just a minute. Thank you guys for joining us. Really over this next 35, 45 minutes, we're really going to be talking about all things calming down the nervous system and the meltdowns and the behaviors and creating this calm, connecting family dynamic that, let's be honest, if you're on here watching, you're probably having some struggles with this. I know it wasn't long ago that I had to face this reality. So this is going to be a really huge opportunity for everyone that's joining us live and anyone that's catching this recording to really, really create and sustain ease and connection with their child and with their family by minimizing so much stress and behaviors and meltdowns and emotions. So before we really get into the nitty-gritty of everything, I want to introduce our guest here today. So Samantha Moe, welcome Samantha. I have known Samantha and her husband, Dr. Ty, for a couple years now, and we have spoken before. We've hung out before. I've been out to their place out in Minnesota, and we said, hey, let's get together and let's provide some great content, some great information, some great strategies. And so for Samantha, her background is speech and language pathologist. She worked in that arena for years and worked with kids with developmental delays, autism, sensory processing disorder, anxiety, behavioral, and then she kind of switched to working with the parents because she noticed something, and we're going to get into that, that actually was really impactful for helping create calm and ease and balance in these kids' life by actually focusing and working with the parents in our approach of parenting and really this thing called mindful parenting. So is there anything else that you want me to add there, Sam?
I really love that introduction, and I'll just say, Dr. Tony, it's amazing to talk to you today. So for those of you who might be streaming on and you don't know Dr. Tony yet, you might know me more. Dr. Tony is an incredible pediatric and family chiropractor out in Pennsylvania. And when we met, we hit it off because he has a really strong framework for living his life intentionally with his wife and his little kids. You have 2 little kids, is that right?
I got 2 wild and crazy boys. Yep.
That's right. Yep. So you got 2 little boys.
Yep.
And so what you guys are really in for a treat because both of us are really well trained in the nervous system, but family dynamics and caring. So I think the one piece that I would share, because the question might be like, wow, how do you work with children and then move into working with parents? And it really stemmed from this place of intentionality, of having grown up as a child myself with a socialized anxiety disorder, to the point where in 10th grade, it had built up so dramatically that I would have blackouts before going to high school. So when I thought, how am I going to choose a career? What am I going to choose? I decided that I wanted to help these kids who felt really locked in and closed in, which is why I got a master's in communication disorders to help kids verbalize and make friends. And ultimately, how that path shifted was, as you know, when you're a parent, you parent your child the best you can, and you have a backstory. Like how you parent is influenced by your own backstory. And so I started, I have so much love and compassion for what my parents did to support me through my process and my other 4 siblings and helping us become, successful, opened up adults. And I really realized that if we can help you parents use these strategies that other professionals are really well trained in, not only does it heal the dynamic in your family, but it heals some of your backstory so you have more ease. So we're going to weave in and out of like parent ease, child ease, body ease, all that good stuff.
Yep. And I think we started with, introducing a premise, and Sam, you nailed it. And I have a very similar backstory of anxiety and that locked in, that shutting down and isolating. And so this is very real stuff. A lot has changed, but not much has changed as far as what our kids are dealing with. And actually, they're dealing with more coming at them faster than ever before. And so this is why this is so important to share this. So really diving back into that premise is we're going to be talking about all things brain and nervous system today. That's what we're going to be talking about. But it's all about how do you create and sustain that ease and that calmness and connection for your child. But for you, mom and dad, and this is so important, and I can share this and be real with every one of you moms and dads out there, is I thought that I knew how to parent, and I thought I knew how to do it really well until I realized I didn't have the skills necessary and the understanding to really take 2 boys who are beautiful, loving, high energy, high impactful kids and actually create that calm and ease based upon the parenting and the skill set that I had. And so really with this is making sure that as a parent, mom and dad, you feel empowered with your parenting, and that you go into scenarios of, hey, this is how I'm going to approach this, I'm going to handle that, and not have the guilt and the shame, because I've lived there with parenting skills. And I want you to really, and Sam, of course, she wants you to feel empowered as opposed to feeling isolated and feeling let down and broken, all these different things. So I think that's the biggest thing that we want to give you guys here today. So let's get into the nitty gritty of our conversation. And I think it's really important that as people are logging on, again, you're catching this live, you're catching the recording, post your questions in the chat box or post your questions in the comments section on Facebook. That way we can understand where the struggles are. What are the things you're feeling? What are you experiencing? So we can either get to those points now, or we can come back around later on and answer those questions and get you that support. So that's gonna be really important. So let's dive into some things. So obviously I'm a pediatric chiropractor. For those that didn't know, we focus on enhancing and creating ease and sustaining ease within a child's nervous system, because it's their nervous system that controls everything in their life. And Sam also takes this approach with the nervous system, just from a different conduit. And so we want to talk about the marriage and her husband, and then her husband's amazing dude, pediatric chiropractic. So this is very familiar to her. And I wanted to really have her share, what is this relationship between this pediatric neurological based chiropractic and mindful parenting? Because in our world, these things go together like PB&J. Like these things just melt together like PB&J. So Sam, I want to get your experience and your perspective on this.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. So what we know is we often think about what is the organ in the body that runs the show. Like what sends signals that influence your health, that influence your behavior. And I know, Tony, again, you're going to talk about this a little bit too. And most people will say, well, the thing that runs the show and keeps me alive is my heart. But what we know is like, well, what keeps your heart alive? Well, it's your brain. It's your brain that has like, you know, the spinal column and all these nerves going out to your heart to keep it beating. And that's where all of this life and this connection and these messages are coming in and out. So the relationship between chiropractic, which focuses more on creating ease and sustainability in your body. Some people perceive this as good physical health. Some people perceive this as good emotional health. And if you don't perceive it that way yet, at the end of this, I think that you will. The same thing is true for behaviors. Like all of the brain science that's coming out of UCLA with Dr. Daniel Siegel, who's a leading neuroscientist in child development, is showing us that the root of challenging behaviors has to do with the brain and different aspects of the brain. So I'm going to share images of that in a little bit here. However, I do want to say that how is chiropractic and parent coaching like PB&J? Well, chiropractic really helps the body feel calm, the internal messaging feel calm, because kids who have anxiety or sensory challenges, they're reacting to the world around them. They're reacting to these different sensations. And it's like there's a robber already stuck in the castle that's sending these messages up to the brain. So yes, you can take a cognitive approach. You can work from parenting. You can work with therapists and work from the chin up on like, what are tactics and what do I do differently? But we also need to make sure that the body is getting some sort of support as well. So what my husband, Dr. Ty here in St. Paul, and I say is chiropractic helps improve behaviors and ease in families by working inside, and then it has an outward effect on the world around them. Versus parent coaching is saying, hey parents, let's work on you who are in the external environment, and let's help you create a sense of calm so that that message is going from the brain down to the body. And that's how they're married.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. And a concept that we talked about in our conversations previously, and ones that I have with parents all the time. And it just makes sense when we boil it down to, if we want to create ease in our lives, then we have to have things that interrupt that stress response, or what you're going to talk about in a little bit, that fire in the brain. How do we create ease and dial that stress response down? Because our default patterns actually are to be in stress mode. That's our default program, and it's there to protect us. But how do we dial that back? And then how do we sustain ease on not just one or two levels of our lives, but in all levels of our lives? So that's going to be really important. So Sam's going to dive into really that brain and that nervous system science.
Yeah, so if we want to create ease, then we have to geek, we don't have to, we get to geek out a little bit about like, what are these underlying processes anyways? So from this model that I was already sharing from the neuroscientist, Dr. Daniel Siegel, he breaks the brain up into two sections. He says, we have a downstairs brain and we have an upstairs brain for simplicity's sake, so that you don't have to hear all the crazy brain science. And basically the downstairs brain is responsible for the fight, flight, or freeze response. So you see this with your kids. You can actually probably identify instantly which types of behaviors your child shows more. Are they more extroverted in their explosions? Are they more external in their behavior? Or do they have more of this like flight and run away or hide under a table? Or because I have a background in developmental delays and special needs, we also see these freeze behaviors in some kids who have processing delays where they just stand there on the playground, or we see like verbal blocks if somebody's stuttering, or, we have all these different levels of downstairs brain stress that show up in different ways with kiddos. So we want to be aware of this because this is the most early primitive developed part of the brain. Some of you have heard of lizard brain. Basically what this means is when it's activated, it changes the chemistry in the brain. So adrenaline and cortisol flood. And this was important, of course, when a bear was chasing us through the woods because we lived in teepees or like on the land. Like, yeah, we wanted to fight, or we wanted to flee, or we wanted to play dead. But what we're seeing is kids are responding to parents or their teachers as if they're a bear, and all you asked them to do was, please put on your shoes so we can get out the door.
Yep.
No. So we want to understand downstairs brain, and that the root of challenging behaviors can so frequently be brought back to this. And then we want to compare this with the upstairs brain, which is what we're all looking for as adults. We're like, we want our kids to be good problem solvers. And so we say things like, hey, what could you do instead of throwing that toy at your brother's head? Well, in the moment, problem solving is not going to work because the downstairs brain is running the show and it's flooded. And I'll show you what that image actually looks like, because I call it fire in the brain. When there's that flood, it's like there's a fire. So if you say something like, hey, look at me, pay attention when I'm talking to you, or for those of you with little kids, right, you're like, you take them by the chin and you turn their face towards you to pay attention, it doesn't work in the moment because the upstairs brain isn't turned on. Additionally, for those of you who love intentional and mindful parenting, you're already teaching good behavioral management strategies. You might have one of those colorful breathing balls where you say, hey, we take deep breaths in, and the ball expands to show them that their lungs and their belly expands, and then we breathe out. But when it comes to that moment of infraction, if you bring out the ball, like Tony, have you ever had one of those experiences that go awry? Like, what would your kid do with that ball if they're really ticked off?
It just becomes a throwing game at that point in time. It's instantaneously get this out of my face.
Exactly. So these are all really good strategies. We want to teach kids these skills, but in the moment, I actually want to shift your thinking to let you know upstairs brain skills aren't going to work. So the goal is not to actually start where we want to start, because as adults, our brains are fully developed for the most part. We want to actually calm the fire in the brain, because that's going to create ease in your kid, and they're going to trigger you even less.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I want to kind of get into this concept of fire in the brain is what do kids in that moment, what are they actually experiencing or in other terms, what do they actually feel in that moment when they're operating in that downstairs brain, where they're actually, again, we look at the nervous system, its job is to perceive the environment, but their nervous system, their downstairs brain is actually perceiving as if there's a threat. What are they experiencing, and what are they feeling from a neurological level?
Yeah, what they're feeling is probably what we would describe as really like straight up emotion, where we're like, oh, my child is experiencing anxiety. So we see this with the kids who internalize their emotions more, and they become perfectionists and they become overwhelmed, and we're like trying to convince them to do things all the time because they're just kind of feeling like they want to control things. So they feel anxiety and overwhelm. They feel anger. So we see this a lot with the kids who are more outward in their behaviors, or they have those acting out behaviors. And, it's easy for us to recognize anger and anxiety, but the root of that is it's a protective mechanism. So when you feel out of control internally, you're going to be rigid and try to control things externally. So we've got the holiday season coming up. I mean, obviously I can't see everybody who's listening right now, but I would say like, hey, so raise your hand if you're already trying to protect yourself from extra requests because you know the season's going to be busy. That's actually your downstairs brain has kicked in. It's a survival protection mechanism because you're trying not to be overwhelmed. But unfortunately, the wiring of these kiddos is that they're naturally overwhelmed and their baseline is pretty high.
Absolutely. So, and I think we as parents, we have to recognize, and I think this is so important. This was kind of the aha moment for me. And I have gone through your program and I've learned a ton from you, and it's made a radical difference in how I parent and how much life force I was draining out being that disciplinarian and having to course correct everything. That's exhausting. That's absolutely exhausting. And yet these simple strategies that almost are like, holy cow, now once I have awareness of what's occurring, that's the first step. That's absolutely the first. I know that's sometimes cliche, but awareness is the first step. It truly is. When you're aware, then you actually may be igniting that fire in your child's brain and nervous system. And when you become aware to that, now we want to actually create the experience of calm and ease. What does that look like for a child in that moment?
Yeah, of how to create calm and ease. Well, we want to be aware of some parenting, natural parenting. They're not even strategies. They're almost like just natural parenting behaviors, instinctive behaviors that contribute and add more fire in the brain. So you're going to recognize yourselves in these right away. So please don't feel ashamed. I have a list of 10 of these hidden landmines that add fire to the brain. And I just created them because it's hard for you to self-recognize. So the first hidden landmine is going to be matching fire with fire. So what we know about kids who have more fire in the brain, who I like to call intense brain children, and you know it again if you're like, yep, I have an intense kid. I've thought of them as strong-willed, or I've thought of them as spirited or having sensory issues, but you might also recognize the word intense. So big emotions, big feelings, big strong opinions about things. So traditional parenting does not work with intense brain kids. So a lot of us were raised with this old authoritarian paradigm where the parent says, here is my expectation and you will rise to obey me. And then they would get bigger and they might get meaner. And you know what happens with an intense brain child? They match you there. They don't back down because their temperament is different. They are not the harmonious, pleasing child who will simply listen because it's the right thing to do. So unfortunately, in the mindfulness world, unfortunately, here's the thing. In the mindfulness world, you are oftentimes a parent who says, I want my kid to have freedom. I want my kid to have choice. I don't want to overpower them. But if we have too much freedom, what happens is it creates a sense of where is my container for a child? And so they actually get more fire in the brain because it's too big for them to actually handle.
Yeah. So in that moment, they're probably not feeling that ultimate sense of safe and protection, which is going to fire that sympathetic or that fight or flight response.
Exactly. So it's really interesting when we're talking about mindful parenting, because we've got this spectrum of, I'm a mindful parent, I'm trying to give them more freedom, but it's not creating enough structure and predictability and safety for them. And then there's moments where you might actually explode because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to do it different and it's not working. So then you explode and you match fire with fire. And what does your child do? Up. You can't even see me anymore, right? Like it keeps going up and up. So the first thing is we don't match fire with fire, and that's yelling, grabbing, spanking, banishing. All of those are just going to create more intensity.
Could you describe banishing for just kind of put that into a real life scenario of what that would be?
Yeah, it's something like, I can't take this anymore. Go to your room. Mm-hmm. Or it's dragging your child up to their room. Now, here's the thing, okay? Because again, there's no judgment. We never want to create shame. I know you are self-identifying if you're a parent listening to this in some moments. So it doesn't mean we don't separate them and create safety for them and you. It's just that we don't banish them in the moment where they're like, I'm a bad kid. You can't handle me. I must be too much. So we set that up with a proactive discipline protocol that is all part of the program. I wish you could talk more right now, but
yeah,
the short answer.
Yeah, we'll absolutely get to that.
Yeah.
Yes. So continue on some of these landmines, and let's create some more awareness for moms and dads that are out there. And this was I can tell you guys, moms and dads, this was the biggest thing for me to wake up and say, "Holy cow! My traditional skills and my like hippie parenting, ideal parenting skills, nothing's working for me right now." And this is what really this first stage of awareness that Sam's talking about. This is what allowed me to start to feel empowered because I was actually way more in control than what I thought I actually was. So this is huge. So pay attention to these. Write these down. Pay attention to these.
Yep. So don't add fuel to the fire. That's number one. Calm the fire. And Tony, I'm just going to ask you, once I share these 3 things that parents unintentionally do, I would like you to share which one you fell into the trap of the most. And if you give us an example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay. So second hidden landmine, this is experiential. So for those of you who are listening to this auditorily, if you are not driving and you're in a safe space where you can close your eyes, please do, because the impact of this 20-second experiment is really powerful. So close your eyes right now. Tony, I'm going to ask you to also. Now just listen to my voice and hear and notice what happens in your body when I do this experiment. No. No. Knock it off. Stop it. Don't. No, I said no. Open your eyes. All right, so starting phrases with no is this landmine that triggers more fire in the brain. And as humans, we have 4 common bodily reactions to starting phrases with no. So Tony, what was your experience when you were listening?
I tensed up.
Mm-hmm.
I tense up.
Yep. And your shoulders went up. So are you saying tension in your shoulders?
Yeah, you could just feel like that rolling inwards is my first reaction.
Yeah. So that's one of the 4 reactions. So we have tension. We have tension in the shoulders and the neck. We have tension in the stomach, which becomes really important because, Tony, we'll have you maybe talk about upper cervicals after a bit here. If there is this tension and kids are like, I can't go to school, and they're having anxious or angry outbursts, well, there's actually calming signals from the upper cervicals up into the brain. So if kids are getting this external stress of you starting phrases with no, or the teacher's over directing or correcting them, they are not being a hypochondriac. They honestly are getting headaches and tension in their body that's making them feel ill. So that's one of them. We have a lady who has joined our Zoom call. So Kathy, if you want to type how you felt in the chat box, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're not able to, that's cool too. But I wanted to invite you to make a comment. So another reaction is this reaction that I call the wilting response. It's usually with people who are more harmonious and pleasing temperament, where they're like, oh, I'm just a bad person. And you weren't even in trouble. Like that was just 20 seconds of a made up experiment. So thank you, Kathy. So that's what you said, you shy away. So I start hearing from families, kids who are 5 years old and they're coming home from school, and parents are asking, well, why did you get that bad color on the behavior chart? And they say, I'm just a bad kid. So this is an example of not getting the positive direction that they're needing, and it's starting to impact their self-esteem, plus creating fire in the brain that is causing this like wilting response. So we've got tension in the body, we've got the shying away, wilting response, then we've got the fight response, right? Like some of you are like, don't tell me what to do. And again, man, like I know I wasn't actually talking directly to you, but that mechanism still kicked in where you're like, don't tell me what to do. So obviously the fight one's obvious. And then fourthly, the reaction is the tuning me out. So we often think about this with teenagers where they're like, whatever, not listening to you. And sure, there's different stages that kids show more of one reaction than another. But it's also true for the 3-year-old who's intense in terms of like strong-willed and opinionated, and they're coloring. And you're like, hey, you need to put that away because it's time for dinner. And they're just like, like they just completely ignore you and tune you out. So those are our 4 responses that if you're starting phrases with no, and actually with your child's name really consistently, it actually creates that same kind of fire in the brain.
Yeah, and a lot of times, it's in particular that last one of almost tuning you out. And again, we see this with littles all the way down to 2 and 3, and then obviously our preteens. And we do that. I mean, adults, we do this as well when we're in that high octane stress. But oftentimes, this is where parents will say they're just manipulating me at this moment so they can get what they want. And in reality, they're actually expressing a stress response to what is occurring within their environment. And that's why that continuously shows up, and why that one is so difficult all the time to recognize.
Yep, you've got it. You've got it. Yes. So then let me share this third one, and then we'll check in with you to hear what your landmine was a little behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
So the third landmine out of these 10 hidden landmines is where you're over teaching with logic. So this is actually my favorite one to talk about, because I think we're so wired to like use teachable moments with children that we think, oh, we're doing a good job where there's so many teachable moments. But it actually creates fire in the brain. So if you say to your child, hey, you need to put that coloring away because it's time to eat dinner and your sister is waiting, it's gonna get cold. I've told you 5 times we were gonna go to the park after this, but now I don't know if we're gonna get to go, and we might not have fun tonight. Like, we use all this logic in the moment, but if your child's tuning you out, like reasoning up here in the upstairs brain isn't gonna help it sink in. It's calming the fire in the brain first so that they stop tuning you out.
Yep. And what's really important to add to this, and Sam nails this, and I'll get into some of my landmines because this is a big one, is we have to remember for our younger kiddos that their frontal lobe, or their upstairs brain, it's not fully developed yet to be able to handle all this logic and reasoning. We want it to be developed, but we have to recognize that it's not fully developed. And that doesn't get fully developed until much later on in life, that we really, really, really can tap into that. And so when we, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, and so much, much later in life. So yes, this prefrontal cortex and upstairs brain, 3-year-olds are just beginning to develop it. And it's really confusing for us as adults, because we're like, well, my child can have a really intelligent conversation. Like I can really reason with them in some moments, but some moments I can't. So please know that that's a normal thing that is just telling you that they don't have access to that brain yet. And I'll show you another image later so that you can see the staircase of how it develops. But we're in our mid to late 20s before that's fully developed. So even if you're listening and you're like, I've got a 14-year-old and I can't reason with them. Yep. True. There's a long way to go.
There's neurological reasoning to that. And what I always describe with my parents is to kind of like breathe some like ease and some fun into it, which is just my style, is you have to remember your child in that age range, when we're trying to use a whole bunch of logic and reasoning to try to course correct or get their attention, their brain is pretty much hardwired for playing like Candyland. Like they're just in play mode and creative mode all the time. And that's where, if we're pinging them with logic and reasoning, but they're playing Candyland in their brain, although they're forming logic and reason, but they're not 100% locked in there yet. That's why that stuff typically doesn't work, and it actually creates more stress, more avoidance, more of the manipulative behaviors, which for mom and dad, and again, I've lived there, your reserves and your life force are just drained out because you're like, I am not getting anywhere.
You got it. So those were our 3 landmines. I'll summarize them real quickly. So matching fire with fire, starting phrases with no or your kid's name, and over teaching with logic. So what was your poison, Tony?
Oh, the poison. So I had poison 1A and 1B. So poison 1A would be more of the like aggressive, like pull you to the side, give me your attention, make eye contact with me. And then the other one would also be using a whole bunch of logic or reasoning. And it's the one that because schedules are so crazy right now, especially if you have multiple kids and they need to go to different events and things like that, which is a whole nother discussion on creating calm and ease. But when we use the reasoning of, if we don't leave now, you're going to make me late, or we're going to be late for this, I would default back to that. And I look back on it now, and although I was using that strategy because that's what I learned as a child, and that was my traditional parenting skill, looking back on it now, again, if the child's brain and nervous system is not fully developed for receiving logic and reasoning and that kind of information, it's almost laughable when you think about them thinking about making you late for something when they really don't care about that. It's more about the connection and the calmness and other things. So those are my 1-2. And again, those are ones. And I think this is really important to understand is those were my programs and my patterns that I gained a significant amount of awareness on. And so when I have more stress in my life, what do you think wants to creep back in there?
Same pattern.
Those same patterns. And the beautiful thing is having the awareness, it allows me to kind of pause and take a moment and say, hey, what would my anti-parenting self do in this scenario versus what is like my superhero parent? What would he do in this scenario? Because that's where you gain control, and not manipulative control. You have control over your emotions, your state, and that gets transferred to your child.
Yep, you've got it. And so just to answer a question that some parents might be thinking at this point is, it doesn't mean you don't have an expectation that your child gets out the door on time. It just means you learn proactive and mindful strategies to calm the fire so they flow with you, because there's a really positive relationship and you're not accidentally triggering fire.
Yeah. And sometimes, and maybe we can talk about these at another time, but sometimes they're so silly and it causes us to break free of our stress response, and it dials down our stress response. And I can maybe share one later on of what I typically like to use for our oldest child. But really, our next steps are, we created these landmines. What does it look like in these moments to actually create the experience where we want our kids to feel that sense of connection and that sense of ease? Like, what can we be doing there to help start facilitating that? Whether that is looking at it from the parent standpoint, what does the parent need to do? And then what do we do to transfer that to the child?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So the caveat here is, I have created an entire 8-week parenting online training around this that lasts 8 hours, because it's 1 hour a week. So I'm just going to give you the bottom line of it. And then if you guys want more information, of course, you can access that, because I don't want you to feel like I'm just leaving you hanging. The short answer to this is that, first of all, you need to learn how to create calm in yourself. And so what I love about the parent and life coaching field is that we get to talk in a customized way to people about like what actually helps you feel calm. But I'm actually going to change that a little bit, because I think that's a really hard question to answer objectively, because most people are like, well, if my kid listens, that helps me feel calm. So it's more like, what could you do for 3 minutes that would feel good? Because if you have built in that you get to sit down and drink your coffee in your favorite chair, looking out the window after your kid got on the school bus, all of that fire and frustration that's built up in your brain has a chance to settle, and you get more happy chemicals. So it's like a chemical game, like, how do we balance this out? Which makes you more resilient. If you've calmed down your fire, by the time your child comes home, your baseline's a little bit lower and you don't actually completely lose your cool as quickly. So that's one answer. And then how do we help kids feel calm? Well, I mean, chiropractic is a huge piece of this for these kids who have this signaling going up into their brain that they're stressed. And even if you change your parenting behaviors, if that pattern has been ingrained for a year, 3 years, 12 years, 28 years, you just really want some body support so you don't have to work so hard. But there are some things you can do as a parent to help your kid feel calm. Things like, can you do heavy activities where there's a lot of pressure into the joints and the muscles? If your child has ever been in occupational therapy, they call this proprioception. So this looks like things like, if they're really a little kid, they can do animal walks, like walking like a bear or a crab to the dinner table, because that body input creates calm in their brain. You can do things like little, I can't think of what the app is called, but there's like little stories that kids can listen to and learn how to breathe. And as if you're walking up a mountain, and just like when you take a breath, your belly expands and you get to the top of the mountain. Like, there's all these good breathing stories and games you can play with your kids. And then in the actual moment, how do you help a kid feel calm? Well, if you don't have a bunch of proactive tools in place so that they know exactly how to get back into self-control, then my best answer to you is pause, take one step back and a breath, and ground yourself first. So at the very least, you're not adding fuel to the fire, and they can recover because they're actually reading your body cues.
And that right there, although it seems so simple and one that would be very much like, yeah, I got that. It's powerful. It's powerful because our children, you got to remember, our kids are connected to us. And so we all understand this from the mom-child relationship, but the dad-child relationship is very much at play here. But that child literally feels your tone. They're there because they still need to feel safe and protected. And if you're not feeling in that place of ease and calmness, guess who's going to pick up on that? And so that's why Sam, she's talking about just pausing. And I always describe that as what parent do I want to show up as in this moment? Do I want to show up as Ace, who is like the super dad and that is calm, is observing things and then makes a decision? Or do I want to show up as Frank, who is all reaction and just immediately trying to douse the flames and create an instantaneous relief of everything? Because a child is going to react and they're going to build upon that. Again, if a child is already in that place of stress within their body and they're firing those stress chemicals, it's very easy to add that into their system where they go from a 9 to maybe an 11 out of 10. And it's also very easy to calm that, where if they're at a 9, they can get back down to like a 7 or a 6. And now we're interrupting that pattern by creating more calm and ease. And the key is sustaining that. Let that be the program for not only that child, but for us as parents. We've got to create that as being almost habitual, that we learn that as a program and a pattern.
Yeah, you've got it. And I'm just recognizing, as parents are listening, you've talked about kind of like your worst person, like bad dad, good dad. And I'm recognizing this from a podcast that my husband Ty just did. Is this like, so you actually did work, I'm guessing, around like, what's my superhero dad persona where I'm at my best, and what's like my worst dad persona? Is that what you're describing?
Yeah. And I think we talked about awareness in the beginning for the parents that are out there. And again, I've been through this. A lot of times parents are like, you have no idea where I'm coming from. No, I've lived this and I have to work on this every day. The reality is, when you actually identify of who you are when you're your worst self, like what are the emotions, the feelings, and you actually draw this person out and you create a life for this person and you can identify with that person. Well, who do you actually want to be? What's the person you actually want to be? Because that's the person you want to have show up when you're trying to make these changes. Because I can tell you right now, and Samantha will tell you this because it's all rooted in the brain and the nervous system and all the science, is when we're stuck in that mode of stress, when we are operating in that downstairs brain as parents, and that becomes the automatic default and it becomes the automatic program that just becomes hardwired, then we start attracting more of the stress into our lives because it's actually familiar. It's actually comfortable. And that's unfortunately in those moments where we talk about, oh, you're just like your mother, you're just like your father. Well, that's because it's becoming a program that gets downloaded for our lives, and then it gets downloaded into our kids' lives, which is why we take our parenting skills that we learned from when we were kids. Yes. That's how it works. And so interrupting this now, and it doesn't matter how old your child is, it really doesn't, because it all can be so effective and it creates so much more ease, and it saves, mom and dad, it saves your life force. It saves your vital energy. So you actually can take time to do things even more so that build up your resiliency and your reserve. So you don't have to walk through life being depleted and your kids aren't responding to a depleted parent.
Yeah, you've got it. And, I'm wondering if it would be helpful for us to talk about, like, where does this fire come in the first place? Like, why do kids have anxiety? Why is there more sensory processing disorder? What's going on when a child has trauma? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so this is something that we speak about all the time. So again, if this is the first time you've ever caught any of us talking about this, I would highly recommend, one, you follow Sam's page, you get to her website, and we can post that and we can get that out in the email to you. That way you can get more access to her. Follow our events on our page, because this is something we talk about all the time. And this isn't something that we just said, hey, here's a problem out there, let's make up a scenario, make up a story that solves that's kind of like linking these things together. These are things that parents have been sharing with us for years and years and years. So it's your stories, mom and dad, of where this stuff comes from. And so in our world of chiropractic, in particular, looking at things from this pediatric, neurological, brain-based science chiropractic, we're looking at what we call the 3 T's, and I'm actually going to throw a 4th T in there, and this is going to be one that you're like, yep. The 3 T's that we always talk about in our lives is, again, you have to remember our nervous systems, your child's nervous system, in order to feel safe and protected, we automatically have to have this default stress response just so we can survive. And so that's always on. The key is when we're looking at someone's life history and you're looking at a child's life experience, we have to go back to where there was more stress and trauma in different moments of life. So we go back all the way during pregnancy. What was life like for mom and dad? What were the experiences of stress going on during that time? Because if mom is experiencing emotional stress, physical stress, chemical stress, which is those 3 T's, thoughts, traumas, and toxins, then that becomes a neurological cascade for not only mom of more stress hormones, which ramps up her stress response, but guess who's downloading that program before they've actually entered our world? Is a child. So we have to look back at everything during pregnancy and delivery and the delivery process and how stressful that is for mom and baby. And then we get into the toxins of, we live in a more toxic world. Many of us have been, if we've been sick or we've never been well, the thing that we've always been taught is take more medicines, do more of the drugs that are actually very much a stress. They create more of a stress response because the chemical toxicity for these drugs. And we're not anti-drug, we're not anti-medication, but the reality is, and everybody would agree, if you've watched a drug commercial, the side effects of these things, it creates more stress in our child's physiology. And then we get into the emotional stress. So as a child begins to feel like, you know what, I don't feel as calm, I don't feel connected, I don't have the confidence, I don't have the self-esteem, I'm feeling isolated, and it just continuously adds more fuel to that fire. And then our 4th T, I talked about the 3 T's of toxins, traumas, and thoughts, and the 4th T is technology. Technology, and we're not escaping it in 2019 and moving into 2020. But the reality is, the more technology we have in our lives, the more that creates more of a stress response within our brain and our nervous systems and the chemistry of our kids, where unfortunately they become addicted to these chemicals because they're always on something. And so this is where we see that over and over and over again.
Yeah, and what happens is that it creates adrenaline and cortisol that at first feels exciting, like a shot of espresso, but then there's either the crash, or there's the addiction to it of I need more because that's my typical baseline. And the thing about kids who are more sensitive, right, where if you're like, my kid has food allergies, they're really sensitive to foods. My kid's really sensitive to noise. My kid's really sensitive to how I parent, and I have to parent, like I have to be so on track. Otherwise, if I'm not calm, my kid's not calm. These kids who have more of this fire in the brain are like the canary in the coal mine. They are showing us that, I know it sounds like so out of the box for some people, but I've personally experienced electronic toxicity in my body, and I was really sick for many years until I got on top of it. But what happens is the frequencies of Wi-Fi and all of this stuff is in the same bandwidth of our nervous system, versus radio waves are outside of the bandwidth of our nervous system. So it didn't make us sick. And in some countries, things like cell phones are banned, or they say don't hold a high-powered smartphone right up next to your brain because of the frequencies that are going in. And it can, I'm just not going to get too controversial here, but there are other countries that are advertising the health effects that this technology has on the human system. And so it's with a little canaries in the coal mine, these frequencies, other than just being addicting because they're so exciting and we want more and more of that, is that the frequencies are interrupting the nervous system flow. So instead of being calm, they're just getting so revved up.
Yeah, and that's when you take a look at the accumulative effect. Again, if our baseline pattern to feel safe and protected is a stress response, that's number one. We need that as a survival mechanism, but we add all these extra components into our lives. It's like a big old funnel that the nervous system has to process. Well, when you overload a child's nervous system with the 4 T's really of thoughts, traumas, toxins, and technology, and now the nervous system isn't able to adapt, you create more of that stress response. And again, the nervous system's job is to perceive the environment and to coordinate all functions and behaviors of our bodies. Well, if the nervous system is stuck in that pattern of fight or flight and you're at that 9 or a 10 out of 10, then you better believe that emotions are going to be that. You better believe that all of our thoughts and our feelings are going to be that. Our physical reactions are going to be that. And this is the key. That is
our immune system. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Everything, GI system. And this is why all of this stuff falls in there. And the key is we're meant to have this fight or flight response in a moment to feel safe, but it's not supposed to be turned on to the level that it is. And so it's not sustainable. And so this is where we see so many times of not only the stress and the anxiety and the overwhelm and the sensory overload for these kids, but as they get older, they actually go into more of that depressed state because they're not able to sustain that stress response. And it's the same thing for parents. We are not able to sustain that stress response. And so we actually start to become more withdrawn as we get older because it's not sustainable to be going 90 miles per hour without ever having an opportunity to fuel ourselves up and to have breaks that actually slow us down to give us that rest.
That's right. It's all, yep, I would agree with that, that you can get depressed, or if you have more of, that's really common with the flight or freeze wired people. But if you're a fight wired people, then you have a hot temper and you're angry all the time and exploding.
Yep. And so this is why it's so important to, from a parenting perspective, a mindful parent perspective, doesn't matter how old your child is, it does not matter. But when you can do this now to save up your reserves, to build up your resiliency, and you pass and download that pattern onto your kids for when they become parents and breaking those cycles. So it's so important.
It is. And so let's leave people with a hopeful message. I pulled up the slides here again. See, these, like Dr. Tony was saying, these are things that we're recognizing in the community and in families and in our bodies and our lives. So we're not just making this stuff up. It's really coming from this place of, I mean, so much research and studying that each of us has done so that we could live mindful lives. And we could feel like we had good health, we had good life force and vitality, we enjoyed spending time with our kids and vice versa, so that kids want to, come back after they've moved out of the house and spend time with us because we've created good relationships. And so I'll say that I know personally from a chiropractic perspective, you can shift and improve any situation. Like you can improve any child or adult's nervous system taking a neurological, gentle approach. And from a parenting perspective, the same thing is true. I've worked with families that have kids who have had fetal alcohol exposure and they're 28 years old, but they have the cognitive ability of a 12-year-old. And no matter how old a child is, or your child is, I should say, these same things apply. If you want your child to have positive relationship with you and have a grounded experience where they don't want to jump out of their skin and they're content in life instead of feeling yucky, from a parent, the strategies that we're always looking for is start from the bottom up of the brain. So calm the downstairs brain. That's going to be the first step through chiropractic, through coaching, through breathing activities. There's lots of different things you can do. Then you naturally walk up this blue staircase you see here. Like this becomes open in the brain because not flooded with stress chemicals. So now we get to layer in connection strategies that begin working. Your kid bonds with you. They listen when you say it's time to come to dinner because they feel good being with you. So we work on calm, we layer in connection strategies, and now we're moving our way up to this upstairs brain so that when they are in that receptive mode at various times of days, now we collaborate. Now you get to be the hippie parent and you get to give them freedom and you say, well, we would like to do something fun today. What do you think that would look like? We need to shift our morning routine so we're not running out of the house. What should we do to warm the day up together? Should I draw on your back? Should I rub your feet? Like now you collaborate and you really hear your child's voice, but you've done it in a way that also empowers you, empowers your child. It's sustainable and it's effective.
Yeah, and it is. And then as we talked about from the very beginning, it is how the brain and the nervous system learns is one, first and foremost, interrupting that pattern of stress so you can create that ease and then sustaining that. That way you have the best experiences as a parent. You're feeling empowered as a parent. But I think the most important thing, what we talk about all the time in our practice, is the number one thing that I want to see from our kids is that they are happy and they are confident and they're enjoying moments of life. Because that is the bigger picture with all of this. So Sam, as we wrap up here, I would love for you to share a story of a family that you have worked with where they've gotten this peanut butter and jelly sandwich of chiropractic, they've gotten that mindful parenting, and they put these two things together, and it really had such an impact for their lives. If you wouldn't mind sharing one of those stories.
Yeah, this was my favorite thing to prepare for, knowing that I was going to get asked to share a story. So I went on my Google reviews for Mad to Glad. There's over 50 of them. And I was scrolling down like, who's had chiropractic and parent coaching? And I read their story. And there's one mom. You can find her story on Google if you look at the reviews, but I'll just keep her name confidential for right now. she had a 6-year-old child with anxiety. So I live in St. Paul. She lives in central Minnesota, 3.5 hours away. And when she called me, she said, oh my gosh, my kid was just diagnosed by the whatever doctor she'd taken the kid to with really severe anxiety. They're talking about medication. What should I do? And like you, I'm not against meds. I'm just looking for, well, if there's that much anxiety, we got to calm fire in the brain. So I know there's intentional things you can do. And so she said, can I pay you? Because my coaching sessions or programs are usually, they're only 8 sessions long to give you all the tools that you need. And she's like, can I pay you to drive here every single week? And I said, I've got something better for you. You can actually do my online training because the tools are described so straightforward that you can follow the steps, right? And she's like, no, that can't be, but it was. But what happened was when she started, she was feeling really desperate. And just like all of you parents who are listening, if you've felt that before, you're like, I will do anything for my kid, including like making somebody come, paying someone to come to my house consistently. And she was just working really hard to keep her own cool, which is important because that's a hidden landmine. But she had to work too hard. She had to be so on top of things that she was saying, I'm always thinking 3 steps ahead. Like throughout my whole day, I've been doing this for 6 years because my kid, like I just always have to anticipate because they're just riding so high all the time. And she said, I'm questioning if anything I'm doing is right, if anything I'm doing is working, because clearly my child is getting worse with her anxiety rather than better. So what I recommended is I said, there's 2 things. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to work less hard. So yes, I'm going to give you effective parenting strategies, but will you please go to this neurological chiropractor in your area? So I had done a search for somebody who practices your style, Dr. Tony. And she started taking her child, and then we started layering in calm tools. So we started layering in mom practicing calm and knowing how to set up positive behavioral interruption plans. So this is through a positive discipline protocol. She learned how to do family meetings. She learned how to do a combination of time out and time in. So she's with her kid, so her kid feels worthy, but we're still taking a break because you can't just rule the roost and nothing happens, because that just, ingrains the kids in control wiring. So what happened was within 2 coaching sessions, which we do these every 2 weeks, so it's a month later of chiropractic and coaching, she got onto our next, we did another phone call, and she said, our kid will go in the basement instead of feeling so anxious that she won't leave my side. The teacher said that she's doing better at school and she can actually separate from me in the morning rather than, again, hanging on my leg and crying and screaming. And not to mention the whole morning that led up to getting to school, which was fighting and screaming and saying, I hate school and I don't want to go. She's like, my child just likes going. I don't know if she likes her teacher now or what's going on. And so I actually had to highlight for her, the fire in her brain has calmed with the chiropractic, with the things you're doing as a parent. So she's more adaptable and she has more ease. And ultimately, I would say that what this mom learned was she learned how to be compassionate and understand where her kid was at and feel grounded, that she knew she had proven tools. So she didn't have to worry what her kid's future was going to be like. She just needed to apply herself differently for a few months. And I knew that what I knew was the kicker of them being successful is that I actually ran into them at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport when my husband and I were going to go on a vacation. And I'm like, hey, I recognize your face from these video chats that I do with people across around the country. And she said, oh, I forgot to tell you, my husband and I were taking our 2 kids right now to Hawaii because we feel so confident that we can navigate public situations with our kid that we really are able to leave the house and enjoy the time together as a family.
That's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's all about is the freedom and the empowerment for the parent, and the confidence that is created there, and then transferring that confidence to your child so they can have great life experiences, so they can grow and develop and feel confident. That's what it is all about. Yeah. Awesome story. We're gonna get ready to wrap up here. So again, if you're watching this live, if you have any questions, put them in the comment section below. Put questions in the chat box. That way we can go back and we can answer these things. But most importantly, how do they connect with you, Sam? How do they connect with you? What's the best way for them to stay involved, stay active with you? Because if you've been on this, and again, I've gone through this, it's something you're not going to want to, you're not going to want to miss out on. It just makes such a difference. So how do they connect with you?
Yeah, I've got some freebies. If you want some more information on the things we're talking about today, like Dr. Tony said, just go to Mad to Glad. It's the Mad #2 Glad on Facebook, and you'll find us. We post 4 things a day: encouragement, tips, things like that, so that you are constantly getting some new ideas of what you can do in common challenging situations. So find Mad to Glad on Facebook. And then you can go to our website, mad2glad.com. And at the top of the page, there's something that's called the 10 Hidden Parenting Landmines. So if you want that email report sent to you, you just click that button and put in your information. Now, from there, like, you can reach out to us anyway. If you're like, I want to have a conversation with you, I want to learn about your online programming, like, you can dig around and find that. But if you want my personal information, it's my email, which is my first name, Samantha, at mad2glad.com. Just put, like, I saw you and Dr. Tony, and that'll let me know that, we'll give you a little something special off a consultation or your program if you decide you want to move forward.
Yeah. And then again, if you're out there and you're like, hey, we need to make a change. We want to save our energy, our life force as a parent. We want to start to create new patterns of calm and ease for our kids. And for those that have that chiropractic component, again, we want to sustain and create ease on all levels, because that's truly where the success is. So if you're missing that piece, please take advantage of that. If you're missing the chiropractic piece to really create calm and ease within the nervous system, there's nothing better. As I talked about, it is peanut butter and jelly, these two things coming together. So they're very, very, very effective. They create a ton of ease in interrupting those old patterns, so we can start to see that connection of calm for that child and for those parents really take shape. So any final things that you want to share, Sam, before we end our webinar today?
Yeah, I would actually just like to highlight you, Dr. Tony, because I've got several families who live out in Pennsylvania. Remind me what city you're in if people want to come find you.
Yeah, so our practice is in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philadelphia.
Just outside of Philadelphia. Got it. Okay, lovely. So I think my encouragement would be my favorite Chinese proverb, which says, because you just learned a lot of information of things that you might want to be doing differently. It says, when was the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When is the second best time? Today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Amazing. Awesome. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to us. If you're looking for more information from Sam, you have her information. If you're looking for events that we're doing, and we're talking about this neurologic component of chiropractic and how much of an impact it makes, follow our Facebook page at Life Potential Chiropractic and reach out to us. Get to the events. They're absolutely amazing. We give you a whole bunch of information, but we give you a whole bunch of hope. That way you're saying, cool, this is a huge step for us in creating that calm and ease. So until that, we're going to have to do this again.
Absolutely.
Again, we're going to provide more information for you guys out there. That way, you're feeling empowered. I want you to feel that way. So until next time, we're all wrapped up. So have an awesome Thursday, and we will talk to you guys later on.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bye, everybody.